Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight here on Tumamoc Hill. I am Elise Cornish. I am the new director of the Desert Laboratory here on Tumamoc Hill. Thank you. We are thrilled to welcome you to a new author series that we are doing in partnership with the Southwest Center and Carlos right there. Hi, Carlos. And the U of A Press. And tonight we will be hearing from not the Larry Bird, but Larry Bird Jr. So William Lawrence Bird Jr. is Curator Emeritus at the Political History Campaign Collection at the National Museum of American History Smithsonian Institution, and he received his PhD in history from Georgetown University in 1985. He has written widely for scholarly and popular publications, drawing upon museum and archival source material. His most recent book, In the Arms of Saguaros, Iconography of the Giant Cactus, is published by the University of Arizona Press, and he lives here in Tucson, Arizona. So I'd like you to welcome William, and he will welcome William. Thank you. We love clapping here. We love clapping. And William is not up here alone. He is accompanied by Bruce Dingus, who is the moderator for this evening. So we're going to have a nice conversation here about the book, which will be followed by an opportunity for you to talk outside with William and purchase his book and maybe get a signature if he's filling up for it. But welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be out here. It's been a long time since I used to walk Tumamoc every Friday evening. It's nice to be back. I think Larry and I talked a little bit about how this will proceed tonight, and I think we're going to give. We talked about this a little bit, and you want to hear Larry and not me, and we'll give you some opportunity for him to kind of outline the book, and then give you some chances to ask questions, which you should have many. But I think the first thing I'd like to start with is to have Larry tell you what you're seeing up here.
Okay. When you make a book, you want to look at as many things as you possibly can. And I have a.
It's not loud.
It's not loud. Okay. Is this okay, Carl? Anyway, so a lot of what you're looking at, everything that's in the book will flash by at some point. But these are the things that didn't quite make it into the book. But the book was this project that I've been thinking about for some time. Particularly in retirement. I was a history grad student here in Tucson in the mid-'70s, and I never quite really got it out of my system. But the time period is, let's say, the mid-19th century to the mid to late 20th century. The images are the earliest Saguaro images that were like woodcuts and engravings that were published by the Congress, United States Congress, all the way down to the travel and tourism industry of the mid to late 20th century, and the postcards, colorful glossy things, matte finish postcards, and then travel brochures and magazines. So those are the images, and the method is really from the object or the illustration out. In fact, illustration is not really the best word. I didn't write this and then sit down and go, oh, I have to plug the images in. No, the images are first, and you want the things that kind of attract your. The things that attract your attention and that. You want objects that kick your brain into gear. So you have something interesting to look at and to think about, and that's your reason to write. So there are some 650 images that are going to fly by 4 seconds at a time. The whole thing takes about 40 minutes, so if you've seen maybe them more than once, you probably need to go home. But so we thought we would just have this as a kind of a wallpaper while we talked about the book in general. But if there's some particular image that you see, we can certainly talk about it at the end. But that's it. So the time frame is the mid-19th century to the late 20th with the travel and tourism boosters, beginning with the botanical explorers, and then the images, you're looking at them, and then the method is photo object out.
So I was going to ask you to explain just what iconography is. I think you sort of just did.
Yeah, okay. Well, iconography are the things that the pictures that you've been carrying around in your head ever since you were a little kid, and that you can add to or subtract from at any time. And usually, if I was giving this as a PowerPoint, right now you'd be looking at a picture of Roy Rogers or something, or you might see the Roadrunner. And these are things that at least I've carried around in my head, but that's what I thought when I thought about a cactus with blooms, a saguaro with arms, that kind of thing. But it could also be words on a page. It could also be a description that someone is trying to relate, describe something to someone. A tall column with spines on it, this kind of thing. So it's photos, but it could also be descriptive words for iconography.
Okay, well, you kind of alluded to this, but you point out that the saguaro started as a botanical oddity, and then or curiosity, and it was gradually transformed into this cultural symbol. Can you explain for me how that happened, and why, for God's sake, the saguaro of all things?
Well, there's really no one definite thing that you can point to definitely, but there are some things that you perhaps didn't think about before, at least I didn't think about them. One is that in 1880, the railroad arrives in Tucson. It arrives from California. It doesn't hook up to the east until later. So things begin immediately going back to California, including saguaros and other exotic, botanical life that are put into Arizona gardens on, say, the coast at Monterey. The Monterey Peninsula has an Arizona garden. And mostly it's the railroad people who are involved in this. Charles Crocker, one of the big four, and Leland Sanford saw what he was doing and ordered up a garden that's still at Palo Alto at Stanford. And so the railroad began putting these massive columnar plants, for the most part, not the armed and branched ones, at their passenger stations. They put them at, and you'll see some fly by, at San Antonio. That was a prominent station. And also they had some at their Los Angeles depot, a very elaborate, large columnar saguaro cactus garden. And then people began making, of course, postcards. And they you began seeing woodcuts and pictures of these in Harper's Magazine, and with a byline of San Antonio, Texas. So now people think, oh, the habitat is in Texas, or the habitat's in I saw them in California. I saw them in Carmel. And what happens is the plants routinely die, almost without exception. It's very rare. But that gets into other questions, but just to make this point, the postcards and the pictures last forever. The plants just die, not immediately. They can fool you into thinking they're alive, and they can even flower and bloom for years, but they're slowly dying in place. But I think that's one of the contributions of the book, and that is that it's building this imaginary habitat, a postcard and a photo. At a time across the country. They even put them at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, and that's the first time I have a photo, or I've seen a photo, of the fully armed and branched plant, a saguaro, on the fairgrounds at Chicago outside the horticulture building. It's just a stunning thing. And it's something that only a railroad with a flat car and a box car and a crane, could have accomplished. And the same man was responsible for the installation of the fairgrounds who was building the Arizona gardens for Stanford and for Crocker in California. So, but after that, you see the proliferation of images, and it goes down almost to the present day, most often cited are the films of John Ford, who stages Tombstone up in Monument Valley, and of course you see the buttes and everything, and of course he has a couple plaster saguaros to stretch the habitat up north. But people think, if you're not really paying attention and you live in the East your whole life with someone like me, really not quite sure just where its habitat is. It's the Sonoran Desert. That's it.
But there had to be at some point an appetite for these images. How did this? How did the symbol of the saguaro? I was amazed. It never occurred to me that people would collect cacti. And what about it become a global phenomenon? How did that sort of spread? The popularity of having cacti in your house or in your garden or wherever.
Well, I mean, collectors are everywhere, and one thing that surprised me was the hothouse culture. There's a man in Scotland who got a little baby saguaro when he was a boy, and he stands next to it now, and it's this tall, but he's in Scotland, and of course, who knows if it's going to put out an arm ever, but he's got it in a hothouse, and if you have a hothouse, it's possible to take these almost anywhere. And certainly the botanical gardens have figured this out. And there are some images that show, that will be flashing by, that show installations outside in, for example, St. Louis, where they keep the saguaros in pots. And every summer, they have 150 laborers at the Shaw's Garden, which is now the Missouri Botanical Garden. They don't do this anymore, but back then they would move these saguaros in pots and install them in the ground to make it look as if they're growing. Outside their entrance pavilion, which is sort of this, it's kind of a demonstration. It's an example of Victorian, consumption or transplantation, consumption, whatever. But people have been coming here to Tucson specifically to collect. There was a man who, and the reason we know this, he established the first cactus journal for collectors in England. He quit his family's silver and gold business to devote full-time attention to his hobby. And he took a ship, took a railroad out here, hired somebody to go with a buckboard and a helper to get some plants. And he was cautioned to not collect big things until we're on our way back. But he got this giant barrel that he just had his mind set on, and he successfully wrestled that thing onto this, and he took it back to England, where he could claim he had the largest example of its kind. But he traveled through Tucson, and he saw them installing the campus cactus garden, some of the first examples of that in the late 1890s. And he went to the Tucson mountains, where he actually pushed a saguaro over to measure it.
Oh.
So the collector mentality is kind of an interesting thing, but it's been going on for as long as there have been plants.
There are a lot of really fascinating characters in this book, and one of the things, just as a free plug here, some books inform and some books explain. It's pretty rare that you get a book that does both, and this one does both. I learned a lot of things here that I didn't know, and I feel like I know a little bit about Arizona history, but there were some really interesting characters in this book that hadn't really occurred to me, and three in particular. One is the novelist Harold Bell Wright, Homer Johnson, the president of the U of A, and Louise Grace, who was responsible for sort of a cactus snuff film. Could you kind of address those three and the role they played in this?
So the first one was Harold Bell Wright. You should know one thing about this, and that is that when I started this, I thought, oh, well, there's going to be this arc of acceptance. Who doesn't love this plant? There's just going to be this arc. It's just going to go up, with familiarity, comes love. But it's actually more like, it goes up a little bit, and then it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. It's going up, but there's like a kind of it's almost like a saw blade, which is that's where this is going, this story is going. And there were people that were actually upset that this was becoming a symbol of Arizona, because they were more in the irrigation field, where cactus is a casualty of irrigation, so they don't want to see saguaros at the World's Fair. They don't want to see, this going out anything other than, and I know this is anecdotal information, but it really does add up after a while. You look at the state seal that we have today, everything grows on it except native botany. It's a storage reservoir. There's a miner with a pickaxe and a shovel. There's a steer representing cattle, but there are no plants. In the meantime, they're moving saguaros to California, where everything grows in California, but not here. But the answer to that, there were individuals here that Bruce mentioned. Harold Bell Wright, the novelist who built himself a home, which is still there on a mesa just beyond Wilmot Road off of, is it Broadway? Yeah.
Harold Bell Wright Estates.
Yeah, it became Harold Bell Wright Estates. But when he bought that, this is like almost 60 acres, and there was nothing, between him and, the Catalinas and the Rincons, and he would just be up on this mesa and taking it all in. But he landscaped his home with native plants. He made himself a driveway, he lit it up at night, and he told his workers, don't mess with the botany, don't mess with the plants. And people came and saw this and were stunned. And most of them were like the local people that had assumed that this was just a wasteland and who would live here. And people from out of town came, to see. And nothing had changed except the introduction of a celebrity home and somebody using the plants in a way that made them look very attractive. It was sort of one of the first landscaping jobs in Tucson. He also had workers that he gave permission to landscape the Desert Sanitarium when that came in. So that was landscaped with plants from Harold Bell Wright. And there'll be some images showing people loading, giant army plants on trucks and taking them away to the desert sand, as it's called. But that's all completely changed now. But the other person beyond Wright was Homer Shantz, who was a botanist, and he was the president of the University of Arizona, and he came here in 1928. And there was a campus cactus garden before he arrived that had been in the front part of Old Main, that is looking out toward the main gate. But under Shantz, the garden went out to the east from Old Main in a 100-foot wide arroyo that went almost to the gymnasium, almost to bear down. And I'll just try to describe this. It was cut into an arroyo, which served to capture water, but also it captured your eye because you'd be down in this thing and there were rocks and things. You almost might forget you were anywhere but in a cactus garden. But what happened eventually was after he left, Shantz left, his successors had no interest in maintaining a cactus garden, and it's basically shrunken down to its current state, which is dedicated to the memory of Joseph Wood Crouch, which is that little island of cactus that you see in front of the main tower. But just imagine that in an arroyo that would go all the way down, past the library today. And then there were people who came out and built homes in the foothills, Jostler homes. And many of you may know that is built by the Murphy Company. But the largest jostler of all was built for a woman, Louise Grace, and she was the heiress of the Grace shipping lines. Her father had been the two-term mayor of New York. And she had a home, and it was called 11 Arches. It's still there. And in the forecourt of 11 Arches, she contracted to have these massive saguaros craned in and planted, 3 massive saguaros. And of course, they shouldn't have attempted this. I mean, it's hard enough to transplant a saguaro that's, say, your height, because it won't really crush the root system that has just been taken from. But anyway, again, that's another example of just this overconfidence and the easy access to giant power tools and cranes and things. Let's move these things. So if you have enough money. And so the things basically just died in place. And just to give you a sense of the scale of this property, if you're driving up the Hacienda del Sol Road from River Road, on your left before you get to the Hacienda del Sol, you'll see 11 Arches Estates. Well, that's like Harold Bell Wright Estates. That's 11 Arches up there. You can't see it from the road. But when to establish the limit of her property, they put workmen holding 2x4s with sheets and told them, walk. And when she couldn't see them anymore, that was the extent of her property. Everyone else had a 5-acre lot, which with a 70-year, can't do anything. And all of that is off now, of course. But there was a man, Charles Herbert, who was very influential as a photographer in Tucson and ran a photo service called the Western Ways. He was also a retired March of Time cinematographer. And this is actually a Jennifer Jenkins story. There's this great book called Celluloid Pueblo. Another U of A, thank you, Abby. But anyway, and this is her story, really. And there's a film that Jennifer Jenkins saved or rescued that shows the last of these massive saguaros being moved to 11 Arches. It is truly the last one because it's to replace one that's already died. And so it shows these men wrapping the plant in mattresses. And you'll see it. I mean, it's going to come by here, in an hour or so. But what the key for me is you see this crane lift this carrot-like root of the saguaro out of the ground, and you can see the thing kind of catch and break. And it's like, and there's a filmmaker friend of mine, Rick Prelinger, in San Francisco, and when Jennifer was showing this film around, he called it the cactus snuff film. But that was yeah.
Yeah, I have a memory of seeing that film. I know I've seen photographs of it. It's tragic.
Yeah.
Well, since we're on that subject, it seems you're reading this that there's a parallel between technology and the iconography, and particularly when the famous photographers start and they seem to have an audience. You want to talk about some of the photographers that were really involved in capturing these images?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I was a history student here in the mid-'70s, and I wish that I had paid more attention, to what I'm interested in now. You could have met all of the photographers in town, the ones they counted all 3 of them.
I've talked with Esther Henderson.
You did? Wow.
Yeah, we published an article for her, and she was lively, just a great lady.
By the way, Bruce is quite modest here. There's a lot of Arizona history up here on the floor tonight, and it's all over here. This is the the editor of the Journal of Arizona History. Former. Okay, and the book review editor, and everything. It's just amazing. Okay, what was I talking about?
Photographers.
So there's Charles Herbert and his wife Lillian. He's the March of Time guy, and Roy Drachman, one of the local developers, convinces, and Sunshine Club, Climate Club president, which is the booster organization to sell Tucson and sunshine, attracts photographers to come to Tucson, and they photograph guest ranch visitors, and then they send them the photographs back to wherever the people are from. So you're from Minneapolis, you see, well, here's Dr. So-and-so enjoying sunny Tucson it's January, And so they actually thought that way. They would interest photographers to come live here. And one of them is Charles Herbert. And that was where the cactus sunsuit came from. That was his and Drachman's idea. We can talk more about that. And there was also Ray Manley, who was from Cottonwood, Arizona, who may be probably the most, I think, effective and just totally compelling, photo publicist. He had his hand in so many things, but I think he was the one who really developed this photographic shorthand of Southwest symbols. You had the saguaro, you had the bathing suit, you had the horseback ride, you had the covered wagon, you had all these things, and sometimes they're all in the same picture. And you'll see some of that come by. And the horseback ride. When he worked for Herbert, and he was an early contributor to Arizona Highways, which is another entity that is important in employing and publicizing the work of photographers. So there's Manley, and who was the other? Charles Herbert Manley. That's basically, Esther Henderson. Esther Henderson was a portrait photographer, and she and her father came to town. She was actually a kind of a high-class showgirl on the theater, a theater person on the stage. She had a stage career, and she realized, well, I'm getting older. I can't do this forever. So she took a photo course in New York, and she and her father traveled west to find a town to settle in that needed some kind of a photo, services, that kind of thing. And so she settled in Tucson, and they bought a house. They were sold a lot. They didn't know what caliche was, so they found out real quick what that was. And she's given a couple of great interviews. And so one of the hires that Drachman brought to town, a man named Chuck Abbott, who had been photographing the guests in Palm Springs at guest ranches there, he just brought this guy in, and Esther Henderson and the other local photographers get together and go to Drachman and say, "What's wrong? Why don't you hire us? Why are you bringing this guy in?" And he had a reputation as not as a photographer and a trail chef. He would take guests out on horseback, make them lunch, and then photograph them. And she went to Drachman like, "What the hell is he? A photographer or a chef? What is this?" And so Abbott went to see her and talk to her, and the next thing you know, they're going out on a date with their cameras together. They get married, and so it's Chuck Abbott and Esther Henderson. They open a photo center on Broadway. That building is still there. You should get it and revive it. It's really modernistic kind of storefront. And then she was also one of the earliest contributors to Arizona Highways, because she's already here and settled and doing landscape work along with her husband, Chuck. And then they moved to Santa Barbara. She just left town.
Yeah, I say she was still around in the I guess the late '80s or early '90s. We published an article by her, a memoir, and she was just a delight. It was just always a pleasure to pick up the phone. It would be Esther on the other end, and she's in Santa Barbara, so just a delightful woman. You mentioned that we talked about the photography, whatever, and you mentioned earlier in passing that boosters really didn't know what to do with this for a long time. Until the 1940s, and then things changed. What changed and why?
Well, I mean, part of Tucson, it's just really kind of an interesting place, a mix of people and interests that come from everywhere, basically. And the there's a saguaro in every image. Even if it's a tiny flying napkin, it's you can see it. But
1940s changed.
And if you look at Tucson's, for example, the Tucson rail station, what's now the Amtrak station. When you arrived in Los Angeles, you were greeted by saguaros. When you arrived in San Antonio, you saw a saguaro desperately clinging to life in a cage being held up with guy wires. When you come to Tucson, you look at the brochure that the Climate Club puts out. It goes, "Trees and lawns greet you upon arrival." And if you look at the station today, it has never changed. It's always trees. There has never been anything with a spine within like a mile of that thing. And if you get off at the airport now, you might be excused for thinking that's a natural saguaro forest right there in the parking lot, So there's always been this kind of like, yes, we live in the desert, but we're so self-conscious that when we put our best foot forward, it looks like the mansion that everyone lives in, which is the Steinfeld Mansion. They actually put that on the cover of their promotional booklet, and it's trees, And you have to go some distance into the booklet before you see someone posing with a a majestic saguaro, and looks like they're in a woman like in an evening gown or something. So we have this kind of coming and going of a passing familiarity with the saguaro as a subject, but to my way of thinking, it really isn't until after the Second World War that all bets are off, and they have the Sunshine Climate Club has an advertising agency.
Oh, is that?
The mattresses.
Oh, that's that's the Louise Grace. See, those are mattresses. That's 11 Arches. That's where it goes. That's the inside. Those are the murals that she made. Now you're back to normal. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I thought this would be a good idea. But the Sunshine Comic Club pays a company, an advertising agency in Los Angeles, to run their publicity. They have little ads in the backs of magazines, clip this, and you get this booklet that I just described that pictures Tucson like any normal residential city that might be in Milwaukee or Indiana or in Illinois, with a few cactus thrown in, just to tell you that it is actually in a desert. And then people come, and they were able to track, people from using this keyed coupon kind of thing. They have your address, they know where you're coming from. And they were able to quantify the value of all of this expense of going through this advertising campaign from the 20s down almost through the Depression, when they dropped off. They didn't have any money. They didn't feel it was the right thing to be paying for advertising. So Drachman and our friend Charles Herbert, the photographer, get together and they decide we could make some photo publicity that would attract the attention of the nation's newspaper editors and magazine editors. And they stage a bonfire at Santa Fe, into which Indians allegedly throw artworks bearing swastikas, because they're not going to use that as a symbol anymore. And this goes nowhere. It gets written up. There are column inches about it, but there are no photos of it that get published. No photos that I know of that exist. So that's the first semi-viral thing they attempt to do to get a Tucson byline. The second thing they do is they make a cactus sunsuit. The prickly pear is the skirt, prickly pear pads are the skirt. They cut the growth tips off of saguaros to make a kind of a breastplate, and with the thorns and everything in it. And this goes viral. They didn't use that word viral, but the word they used were cactus gags. They made cactus gags. They could do it themselves without the expense of an advertising agency. And so this particular photo got into 300 newspapers. It went around the world. And then Life magazine came calling, we want to do a story about it. So they did a page story, and they went back to the desert to stage and show how they had done it. Now it really was a bad idea on so many levels, except that it did attract attention. When it was published in a newspaper, the byline, which they could not control, the headline was like, "Touch me not." Just stand back. And I think even Drachman thought that, even he thought it was a bad idea. I mean, he published two very nice memoirs in the 80s, and he never talked about this at all. Never at all. But yet he's in the pictures in Life magazine, showing how we did it, how it's staged. He's wearing his shiny rodeo parade shirt. And it was just a bad idea. But people are becoming, cactus minded, that this can be a thing to get and attract attention. And so the Sunshine Climate Club, they form a high school model club of young women it starts at Tucson High School, but it eventually goes to all of the high schools. Kind of like a cheerleading pom-pom program. It's a model club. And so they would hire out models to photographers with a chaperone, and they would pose them on plants in bathing suits. And I don't know if any of that been by yet, Okay, so you saw what that is. And so this is kind of where my interest in this came in, kind of weirdly, because I saw this magazine cover, which is a Ray Manley photo. And this is what really got me started in this thing. I think he may have seen this too. But the more you look at this, you go, gee, where are the spines? Like, I know when the plants get old, they sometimes drop their spines, slow down, but this one, I think, has suffered from loads of attention. And I found this in a DuPont Circle, used bookstore, in DC, where I'm from. And I held on to this forever. And when I retired, I came out here and I thought, I wonder if there's more of this. Is this just a one-off? What is this? It turns out there's a lot more. It's how to become a Sunshine Climate Club model. It's like this unpublished manuscript of photos that they made. And it's awaiting a feminist scholar to add a little introduction and just publish it as it is, and it'll be quite amazing. So it goes from this getting off the train station, trees and lawns, to like, hey, we live with this stuff. And that's sort of where the title of the book came from, In the Arms. She's literally in the arms of Saguaros, literally in the arms. You cannot get closer to the plant than sitting, standing, leaning on it. Even they'll put a board on it so you can sit on it. I mean, it's just the staging of it is so, to me, it was just pretty compelling.
This isn't in the book, but I'm guessing, since gender is treated in these photos, and race appears too. The attitudes toward race in the 60s and 70s and maybe beyond, am I right?
Yep. You're right.
And I say that just to make the point. She said that when we look at these, we see ourselves reflected in them, and I think you can follow that along. But just to back up a minute, since we're located here, what role did the Desert Lab play in this?
But while we were on that, I mean, in terms of the images that you find, you will rarely find an image with a black person in it. There is an image that will fly by in 4 seconds of a man who happens to be black posing with a Saguaro. It looks like it's maybe post-war. Possibly he was stationed here. And certainly you see the laborers from the Desert Sanitarium who are excavating this plant are black. The use of the scantily clad models, that goes without saying. But the other thing that was kind of a source of disappointment to me, and I'll get to Tumamoc with this, is that there is really an absence of fruit harvest imagery. There's almost next to nothing. I mean, you almost have to go, I can't think, I found a postcard, and it's a relatively recent one, maybe from the 1970s, or maybe even the 80s. It's a really tough thing to find.
And yet there's one is it Bartlett or Emory? The Bartlett survey, there's a lithograph of fruit.
Oh, yeah, that was a, Bartlett and Emory, neither one of them traveled the Gila River Valley while the plant was flowering. So the illustrations that they published, according to George Engelman, the botanist who classified the plant, were totally useless. They were great as dramatic presentations of botanical discovery, but in terms of botanical art, they were just next to nothing. And then Engelman sat down to write instructions to future collectors as to what you should be collecting. We want to see fruit. That they'd rather see fruit rather than anything else, to be able to properly classify it. But Tumamoc, the building up there that you're all familiar with, if you walked halfway up the hill onto the mesa, was built in 1903 with money from Andrew Carnegie, the Carnegie Institution of Washington, D.C. And it was really administered by people from the New York Botanical Garden. Nathaniel Lord Britton, who was the director of the garden, would send people out. Daniel McDougall was the first director of the laboratory. And that doesn't mean that they were actually here. They would do this from New York, and they would employ, they call it resident investigators, like William Cannon, to come out and actually be here on the site. And we also have to mention Godfrey Sykes, whose house is over just across the lot there, still there, and the first above-ground swimming pool in Tucson is there. It's not interpreted here, but you can, kind of look at it and see. And Sykes is the one that built this boathouse. For the boats that he made, when they would go explore the delta of the Colorado River, they would sometimes just go there, build a boat, leave it. I guess after that, they began to store boats here for exploration when there was more water than there is now. But what's really interesting about this is that Britain and a man named J.N. Rose at the Smithsonian, in an effort to get more money from Mr. Carnegie, who was also on the board of the New York Botanical Garden, and who played a major role in funding this arid plant study here, built a building. They renamed the saguaro, it was Sirius giganteus. They reclassified and renamed it Carnegia giganteae. And in 1908, this was announced. They announced it in the Washington Post, which would be surely where he would see it, an audience of one. And then he was brought here up to the hill, up to that building. And we know this because McDougall wrote a letter to Britain to tell him what had happened with Mr. Carnegie, who was kind of nonplussed at what McDougall called the honor so intended. Because Carnegie had seen the 5 or 6 columnar saguaros that McDougall had collected, and they were in the New York Botanical Garden. He wasn't aware that this was like a vast field, through the Sonoran Desert, that this was a huge thing. He thought it was a new discovery that they had made. He misunderstood. And I think personally, all they wanted was to get his photograph posing with a plant. McDougall traveled with crates of camera equipment, and we know everything we know about the area around here is probably because of McDougall and his camera work. There is yet today a dark room that's part of the building up there with a little red window in it where they develop film. But there are no written records of Carnegie's visit to Tucson. There are no pictures of Mr. Carnegie with his plant. It was just this kind of a failed, exercise. But the funding for the laboratory eventually did run out, and I'm really not too checked out on what the administration of it was after that in the 20s. But there are some of the oldest plots that are still being surveyed here with the census for plant growth. So.
Well, we said we were going to limit this. I know you've got questions. What I'd like to end on, Larry, is there one thing you'd like people to take away from this book?
Well, you've seen a lot of photos, and most of them are people posing or posed with the plants, and they're actually reaching out and touching, poking the plants. And I closed the book with those snapshot kind of photos, things that people, self-images that people took and that they created. But really, I think I might have missed it because it's really not about us touching the plants. These plants touch us. And that's really what all of this is about, I believe.
Questions?
Cool.
Questions? Complaints?
Do you have a favorite photo? Do you have a favorite image?
It's probably the magazine
Yes.
cover, because that's just what got me intrigued. Yes, Ron?
The Sunshine Club, were they mostly responsible for the adoption of the saguaro as emblematic of our area?
It's hard to that I think that'd be kind of like a mixed question. I mean, they're as responsible for trees and lawns at the railroad station as they are for, fabulous, bathing suit pictures and barbecues and with saguaros and all of that kind of thing. I think people have just picked it up and run with it. I mean, it's out there and you can choose to run with it if you want. I think most people, given that choice, run with it. I mean, who cannot drive out over Gates Pass and not just be, slack-jawed the first time they see that? I mean, I'm not from here, but the people who were here either for their health or they were here for some kind of extractive, industry, a goal, idea, dream. And if that was your dream, then maybe the saguaro was just kind of in the way. But if you're here for your health, this is a source of endless just awe and just it's this unbelievable botany that we have and enjoy here. Yes.
Can anybody remember the first time they saw a saguaro and whether they apprehended what it was or they thought it was something else? We were riding in a bus with a guy from New Jersey. He's looking around and said, "What are all those phone poles doing?" It's New Jersey.
Anyone want to volunteer a story? Yeah, yes, in the back.
How long did it take you to amass collection, or what was the process of amassing these photographs and postcards?
Well, I had back east. I had a postcard collection that I put together, but Arizona was always like on my radar. And back there, no one wants those pictures. No one wants pictures of cacti. And Phil, he's laughing. He knows. It's all too true. Out here, they're really prized, and they're hard to find back out here. So I was fortunate enough, and I had this massive postcard collection that I gave to my museum when I retired, but I kept out the Arizona card C for future projects. So, but I would just, you go to a paper show, you go to a flea market, this stuff is so ubiquitous, it's hard to not find it on any given Sunday, any given place. Yes?
I used to be part owner of the Blue Swirl restaurant here in Tucson.
Oh.
And so my husband and my father-in-law ran the restaurant, but they let me have the gift shop, and it was all Blue Swirl stuff. And we sold 1 million t-shirts with the Blue Swirl logo, our logo on it,
You still have them?
that I drew. Yeah. I did.
I'll talk to you later.
What was the comment? Could you repeat her comment?
She ran the gift shop at her parents' restaurant, the Blue Swirl.
My ex-husband.
I'm sorry.
Ex-husband and
Blue Swirl.
His ex-husband,
Blue Swirl restaurant.
the Blue Swirl.
And I think the sign is, the neon's still there.
Yeah, the neon's still there, because we went to a neon exhibit, and we saw pictures of it, right?
Oh, the Ignite.
Yeah, we went to
It
Ignite.
should, yeah.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
great museum.
yeah.
Yes.
So are you tracking contemporary iconography?
I don't really collect it. I mean, to me, I'm always amazed when, if and when I'm lucky enough to travel, I'll see this in, Baltimore. Or I'll see it in France, or I'll see it almost anywhere you go. It's become this thing that you see. It's not quite still expanding its like imaginative habitat, which can be, up to infinity, but I'm really more amazed at the expansion of it around the periphery of its actual habitat. I see more saguaros, little neon saguaros in windows in Santa Fe than I see in Tucson, which is kind of interesting. But it's just something that I file in my head. I don't really, I'm not actively collecting it. Have a place to, But that's the thing about postcards. They're small and flat. You can, there's almost no limit on that until there is. So.
What do you do? I have a shoebox full of postcards that my dad collected. What do you do with that?
What do you do with it? Well, I have a little file drawer, a little 5x7 file.
What do I give him? Is anybody interested in those things?
I would start with the Arizona Historical Society, and they Although they do weed their
I mean,
collection
these are
from
for
time to
baggies.
time, but you might have something that they would really want, a real photo postcard.
I hate to,
No, don't throw it
my
away.
kid, no, but my kids are not,
Your kids don't want your stuff.
they don't want that.
They don't want it.
The post office museum?
The Postal Museum, when they get postcards, they turn them around and they sell them for 20 cents a piece. So you can go down there and it's like postcard heaven up on the top. They're more interested in cancellations and philately.
Many of your pictures, as they go by, are black and white, and then they're colored.
Mm-hmm.
Did you color them, or did
No.
you find the same thing in color?
Well, the arrangement of the thing is, I put it's a Flickr program, like a slideshow, that I'm running online, and I hit the random arrangement button. And then I thought, no, that's probably not gonna help out people. So then I began to group them consciously, so if you saw like a Sabino Canyon, you'd see another Sabino Canyon, then another one. And so some of those
Where
are,
is that?
that's the watermelon cactus. That was on the eastern periphery of Saguaro East, where I was told that was just outside the park, but it's a beloved thing. It's no longer there.
But have you seen the one out in Ironwood? Off of
Oh, the
Apple Valley?
Shiva? The
Yeah,
Shiva,
yeah.
yeah.
So
I
I
don't-
picture that before, that's
is
Yeah.
the color artificial then, or
No,
did
well,
you program?
well, what happens, if it's a postcard, if we wait long enough, one will come by.
Yeah.
They were began as black and white images, and then they were colorized in Chicago. And the man who took them, and then there was a whole a postcard company distributor in town, the Lolliscard specialty company, who ordered from the Kurt Teich company, which was the manufacturer of postcards. They were printed in Chicago. And so to tell the colorist what colors to do, he put a tissue overlay on it and instructed them, this cactus, make it the color of a cucumber. It actually will say cucumber. And he would often reference other cards that they had successfully printed. So the colorists would know, who have never been here or seen anything. Yeah, well, that's a Charles Hurwood photo in his backyard. That's Roy Drackman. And this is the staging for Life magazine. That's the Life article. And the original photos, some of them are in the Arizona Historical Society. We need to give them a shout out. That's in the Arizona Historical Society. This is part of that How to Become a Sunshine Climate Club model. That Historical Society.
In there, did you have to pull them out or are they on view?
No, you have to pull them out. Fruit harvest. Yes.
But,
So
yeah,
the
there you
early
go.
photographs, how do you date them, or do you have trouble dating some of the early photographs?
Well, the earliest ones were actually published, the engravings and things. And there's Instagram, yeah, of course. The fiber artist. No, you can almost kind of, I'm getting pretty good at just looking at just the way something looks, or know the photographer's dates when they were here in town and when they were working. There are many ways to do that, but I wish often that they had done you the favor of writing on the back. A lot of these, it isn't the date so much as you don't know the location. Cactus in the desert, where is that? They find almost like they go out of their way to find a generic ridgeline, so you'll never know. And if you went there today, everything has changed. So, anyone else? Let's see here. This is Kurt Teich instructions. Like make these, more yellow, or make them smaller. Don't make them larger than that. It's like.
Larry just said, "Are we done?" Any more questions? Larry's got a whole. I've seen him do a whole show on colorizing these things. It's fascinating. It's a real craftsmanship.
He cut out parts and then he would paste them into scenes.
Yeah.
like that.
So,
So that's the file for the Arizona card. It's a large letter card, and that's the image of the saguaro they're going to use in the card to see how it starts to come together.
Oh my God.
And then the A is something that is a capital. They added an airplane to make it modern.
see,
That's the finished colored card.
now there's a program for that. Just
This is this is the road to Mount Lemon. The photo, that's the card at the can. Anyway,
That's another thing we've lost, is it the Take a Woody Cactus Forest. Yeah.
it's the road over Gates Pass.
And what it is?
That's the tissue overlay telling the colors
Oh
what they're how they're colorful.
Yeah.
The company that made this went out of business when you could simply make a Kodachrome card. Some of these are in the book, not all of them, but that's the benefit of being able to run this on ad nauseum. So, well, thank you very much.